Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the special audiovisual recording of the textbook reading on the Persian Empire. As you may or may not be aware, for this particular part of the lesson, we're going to be doing a quick textbook reading while answering some key concept questions about one of the mightiest empires that ever ruled the world. In case you're also wondering, where does this fit into the unit upon which we're talking about? Studies of the early world show us the evolution from early man to early civilizations to early empires. We cannot have a conversation about world cultures and world history without the Persian Empire. So with that in mind, please let me encourage you to open up to today's lesson on the Google Doc on Google Classroom, and please get ready to answer any and all key concept questions that appear. Please remember that you can replay any part of this presentation that you might need for clarity later on. Let's get started. Setting the stage. The Medes, along with the Chaldeans and others, helped to overthrow the Assyrian Empire in 612 BC. The Medes marched to Nineveh from their homeland in the area of present-day northern Iran. Meanwhile, the Medes' close neighbor to the south, Persia, began to expand its horizons and territorial ambitions. The rise of Persia. The Assyrians employed military force to control a vast empire. In contrast, the Persians based their empire on tolerance and diplomacy. They relied on a strong military to back up their policies. Ancient Persia included what is today modern-day Iran. The Persian homeland. Indo-Europeans first migrated from Central Europe and southern Russia to mountains and plateaus east of the Fertile Crescent around 1000 BC. This area extended from the Caspian Sea in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. In addition to fertile farmland, ancient Iran boasted a wealth of minerals. These included copper, lead, gold, silver, and gleaming blue lapis lazuli. A thriving trade in these minerals put the settlers in contact with their neighbors to the east and to the west. At first, dozens of tiny kingdoms occupied the region. Eventually, two major powers emerged: Medes and the Persians. In time, a remarkable ruler would lead Persia to dominate the Medes and found a huge empire. Cyrus the Great founds an empire. The rest of the world paid little attention to the Persians until 550 BC. In that year, Cyrus, Persia's king, began to conquer several neighboring kingdoms. Cyrus was a military genius, leading his army from victory to victory between 550 and 539 BC. In time, Cyrus controlled an empire that spanned 2,000 miles, from the Indus River in the east to the Anatolia in the west. Even more than his military genius, though, Cyrus's most enduring legacy was his method of governing. His kindness toward conquered peoples revealed a wise and tolerant view of empire. For example, when Cyrus's army marched into the city, his generals prevented Persian soldiers from looting and burning. Unlike other conquerors, Cyrus believed in honoring local customs and religions. Instead of destroying the local temple, Cyrus would kneel there to pray. Cyrus also allowed the Jews who had been driven from their homeland by Babylonians to return to Jerusalem in 538 BC. Under Persian rule, the Jews rebuilt their city and temple. The Jews were forever grateful to Cyrus, whom they considered one of God's anointed ones. The Hebrew prophet Ezra tells of Cyrus's kindness. From a primary source down here, "This is the word of Cyrus, king of Persia. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he himself has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. To every man of his people now among you I say, God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem and Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God whose city is Jerusalem." Cyrus was killed as he fought nomadic invaders on the eastern border of his empire. According to Greek historian Arrian, his simple house-shaped tomb bore these words: "O man, I am Cyrus the son of Cambyses. I established the Persian Empire and was king of Asia. Do not begrudge me my memorial." The next section, Persian Rule. The lack of unifying conquered territories failed the rulers who followed Cyrus. They succeeded by combining Persian control with local self-government. Cambyses and Darius. Cyrus died in 530 BC, and his son Cambyses, named after Cyrus's father, expanded the Persian Empire by conquering Egypt. However, the son neglected to follow his father's wise example. Cambyses scorned the Egyptian religion. He ordered the images of Egyptian gods to be burned, and after ruling for only 8 years, Cambyses died. Immediately, widespread rebellions broke out across the empire. Persian control had seemed strong a decade earlier, but it now seemed surprisingly fragile. Cambyses' successor, Darius, a noble of the ruling dynasty, had begun his career as a member of the king's bodyguard. An elite group of Persian soldiers, the 10,000 Immortals, helped Darius seize the throne around 522 BC. Darius spent the first 3 years of his reign putting down revolts. He spent the next few years establishing a well-organized and efficient administration. Having brought peace and stability in the empire, Darius turned his attention to conquest. He led his armies eastward into the mountains of present-day Afghanistan and then down the river valleys of India. The immense Persian Empire now extended over 2,500 miles, embracing Egypt and Anatolia in the west, part of India in the east, and the Fertile Crescent in the center. Darius' only failure was his inability to conquer Greece. For context here, before we go on to the next reading, or next part of the reading, Here's the extent of the Persian Empire by 500 BC. As you can see, this empire spanned across the ancient world, touching pockets of Africa, the Middle East, of course, predominantly the Middle East, Europe over there, and parts of Asia. Provinces and satraps. Although Darius was a great warrior, his real genius lay in his administration. To govern his sprawling empire, Darius divided it into 20 provinces. These provinces were roughly similar to the homelands of different groups of people who lived within the Persian Empire. Under Persian rule, the people of each province still practiced their own religion. They also spoke their own language and followed many of their own laws, and this administration policy of many groups, sometimes called nationalities, living by their own laws within one empire, was repeatedly practiced in Southwest Asia. Although tolerant of many groups within his empire, Darius still ruled with absolute power. In each province, Darius installed a governor called a satrap, who ruled locally. Darius also appointed a military leader and a tax collector for each province. To ensure the loyalty of these officials, Darius sent out inspectors known as the king's eyes and ears. Two other tools helped Darius hold people together in his empire. An excellent system of roads allowed Darius to communicate quickly with the most distant parts of the empire. The famous Royal Road, for example, ran from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Anatolia, a distance of 1,677 miles. Darius borrowed the second tool, manufacturing metal coins, from the Lydians and of Asia Minor. For the first time, coins of a standard value circulated throughout an extended empire. People no longer had to weigh and measure odd pieces of gold or silver to pay for what they bought. The network rose with wide use of standardized coins promoted trade. Trade, in turn, helped to hold the empire together. And of course, for clarity later on, if you need, here's some more information about the Royal Road. As you can see, this was probably incredibly beneficial, the lifeblood, if you will, of the Persian Empire. And here's the last section right down here. The Persian Empire. So by the time of Darius' rule, about 2,500 years had passed since the first Sumerian city-states had been built. During those years, people of the Fertile Crescent had endured war, conquest, and famine. These events gave rise to a basic question: why should so much suffering and chaos exist in the world? A Persian prophet named Zoroaster, who lived around 600 BC, offered an answer. Zoroaster's teachings. So Zoroaster taught that the earth is a battleground where a great struggle is fought between the spirit of good and the spirit of evil. Each person, Zoroaster preached, is expected to take part in this struggle. The Zoroastrian religion teaches a belief in one God, Ahura Mazda, and at the end of time, Ahura Mazda will judge everyone according to how well he or she fought the battle for good. So traces of Zoroastrianism, such as the concept of Satan and a belief in angels, can be found in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. After the Muslim conquest of Persia in the AD 600s, the Zoroastrian religion declined. Some groups carried the faith eastward toward India, and Zoroastrianism also was an important influence in the development of the Manichaeism, a religious system that competed with early Christianity for believers. The followers of Mithra, a Zoroastrian god, spread westward to become popular religion among the military legions of the Roman Empire. Today, modern Zoroastrians continue to observe the religion's traditions in several countries, including Iran and India, where its followers are called Parisis. Political order. Through their tolerance and good government, the Persians brought political order to Southwest Asia. They preserved ideas from earlier civilizations and found new ways to live and rule. Their respect for other cultures helped to preserve those cultures for the future. The powerful dynasty Cyrus established in Persia lasted 200 years and grew into a huge empire. As you will learn in Section 4, great empires also arose in China and dominated that region, and also throughout the entire rest of the world. So there you guys have it. Before we close off here, please let me encourage you to answer the key concept questions for the Google Doc for this part of the lesson, and then also keep this in mind. Yet again, the reason why we talk about the Persian Empire, I think the map speaks for itself, is that when we look at empires in world history, they tell us a lot about how city-states and countries are run today. Some of the cues of successful governing and administration and social institutions help us understand why we do some of the things that we still do to this day, so many years removed from the days of ancient times. Thank you very much for paying close attention, and once again, you can replay any part of this presentation that you need for help, detail, or clarity.